everyone, and welcome to the live polling session for the Open Networks project. Thanks for so many of you for joining us. We're going to start off by having three introductions from three of the leaders of the Open Networks project, talking about their particular work streams in Open Networks. First of all, we're joined by Sotirios Georgiopoulos, the Head of Smart Grid Development from UK Power Networks. I'll hand over to you, Sotirios, for a brief introduction to your part of the project.
Thank you. So I lead the flexibility services workstream in Open Networks. And over the last year, we've seen a huge increase in flexibility available for providers to participate, DSO flexibility. So currently, in various forms of products, we have 2 gigawatts of flexibility that has been procured or is being procured in 2020. So to enable that, our workstream has focused in ways to either make it simpler or more transparent and increase trust in terms of the kind of customer journey or the flexibility journey for providers. So I want to talk about 3 things in the next 5 minutes. The first one is the introduction of common products. So currently in the UK, as agreed last year, we have now all 6 network operators. We have introduced the 4 common active power products. And we're using those products for procurement. They are called the same wherever you are in the UK. They have the same characteristics. And we are further driving standardization of those characteristics. So the first thing is the 4 common products. The second area of progress this year, which in my view, a record time really to delivered in record time, is a common contract. So as of November 2020, so as of November this year, all 6 companies have adopted the common contract for contracting between DNOs and flexibility service providers for provision of flexibility services. So that contract was developed over the course of the last 18 months, went live in April this year. We have already incorporated feedback and will be further developed. But I think again, the important thing here is we understand that flexibility providers operate all around the country. In many cases, they might have plants in different parts of the country. So what we've done is we've made sure that wherever you are in the country, you can have a similar, a common experience, which hopefully reduces the cost and the complexity and and removes another barrier for participation. And then the third area of work that I would like to highlight is the evaluation framework for flexibility. So part of the feedback, because in Open Networks is a stakeholder-led program in the sense that we have quite wide-ranging stakeholder engagement. We have an advisory panel, but we also do a lot of public consultation, and we engage and respond to stakeholder feedback. So one of the things we heard was that a way to get a consistent and common evaluation of flexibility, so we understand how DNOs come up with the various values that they put to flexibility, would increase confidence in the way that these markets are set up. So we developed this year a common evaluation methodology. It's backed up by a cost-benefit analysis tool, and we just consulted on it, and we're making some further changes to reflect to some of the feedback we got. And of course, it's going to be continuous work on it, but there is a commitment that all 6 companies are going to adopt this tool from the latest 1st of April 2021. So again, we're going to have a common framework for evaluating the flexibility, which should further help and add clarity, if you like, in the journey of flexibility services. So there is a ton of work that is happening on the background as well in terms of standardization, and there is a very exciting 2021 program where we've picked up and will focus on further coordination and standardization with a national system operator. We understand that local markets and national markets have to align and coordinate in order to make sure we maximize opportunities for providers. So that's a focal point. And then another of the focus areas is going to be the interplay between flexibility services and flexible connections. And again, that's where we've got lots of feedback from our stakeholders. And it's an area we've been doing a lot of work on, but we're going to focus much more on next year. So to summarize, common contract, common products, and a common evaluation framework are really the foundation blocks, what we believe is going to enable kind of DSO flexibility to move and take up even faster in the UK market. So that's it from me. I just did a quick overview, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and any questions during the debate session.
Thank you, Sotiris, for that insight. We're just going to go to a quick poll of the attendees. So everyone look up on your screens so that you can take a look at our question. It's what are your top priorities for the Open Network Project's flexibility work? Got a couple of minutes to answer this poll. We'll be sharing the results of the poll a little bit later in our panel discussion. Okay, thanks so much for your answers there, everyone. And thank you, Sotiris. Next, I'm going to ask Mark Herring, the Head of Code Change Delivery at National Grid ESO, to talk about his role in the Open Networks project and progress made therein. Over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having us here today. In the next 5 minutes, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the scope of the workstream for whole energy system workstream, a bit of what we focused on throughout 2020, and then lastly finishing up on what we're going to be aiming to achieve next year in 2021. So to start with the scope of the whole system workstream, as many of you will be aware, the whole system is quite a large topic, and so we made very sure to put bounds on it and focus our efforts to make sure we delivered as much value as we could. And so the way we did that was putting basically three sort of boundaries on our focus. The first one is to look at the interactions between gas and electricity networks. And what we're saying there is implicitly is that we weren't focusing as much on transmission to distribution interactions, because those are covered in forums elsewhere in industry, but mostly around the gas electricity interactions. The second part of that scope was looking at not just networks, but thinking 1 degree of separation beyond where networks exist. So it's not just the interactions between the networks, but who are the immediate stakeholders that those interactions might impact. And as we get on to what we're focusing on this year, you'll see a lot of that we found was working collaboratively with local authorities, but also across networks and working between transmission, distribution, gas and electricity network owners and operators. And then lastly, in terms of scoping, in response to really strong stakeholder feedback, we made sure that we're focusing as much as possible on tangible change that we can make today to processes that already exist and aligning those in a whole system way, rather than taking a longer term, more strategic or sort of thought leadership approach, which is we thought was quite a well-served space, and stakeholders agreed with that. So within that scope, what did we do this year? We had a number of products. And it's probably one of the more diverse work streams and sort of looking at lots of opportunities, and it's one of the younger work streams within open networks. So the things I wanted to cover today, firstly, is the whole system CBA project that we focused on this year. Now that's throughout the years, worked with stakeholders, worked with Ofgem and BAYS across networks, and it's developed a model that will support Ofgem's coordinated adjustment mechanism process, which is going live next year. And this model allows gas and electricity networks to transparently invest on behalf of consumers across the fuels in order to realize whole system benefits. So that's seen a huge amount of engagement across network companies, as well as testing with stakeholders, and that's looking to go live next year. We're looking to, in 2021, to do a few sort of trial runs and testing the model in anger before it goes into the coordinated adjustment mechanism process. Secondly, we looked at, in our product 3, exploring the potential for greater integration of gas network company and gas system processes, analysis, data, and insight into the GB-wide future energy scenarios work that the ESO produces. And that was a really interesting piece of work in that it sort of illustrated the existing processes that are already in place, and how, while there isn't exact symmetry between the gas and electricity networks, there is really robust data and processes feeding into that future energy scenarios work. And it gives a really good whole system view. The next bit that we looked at, well, there's two parts to this across two products in the work stream, and that's around how do distribution networks work with local authorities. So you've got electricity networks, gas networks, and local authorities putting together their long-term development and investment plans. And we're looking at how can we best serve the local authorities and the consumers that reside within those areas from a whole system perspective. And so the two elements were, first of all, looking at an optioneering service and how can gas and electricity networks work with local authorities, understand the development plans, and see if there are any further opportunities between just supplying energy through one fuel or another. And so we had a few case studies. There was one in Coventry, and there's another one in the Isle of Dogs in London, where there's a 50,000 home development, and we're looking into how can the gas, electricity, and potential hydrogen networks work together to provide better energy supply for consumers. And then the last element of the work stream was looking at how do we get the insight and the information back from those local authorities, and how do we do that in a consistent way across all networks, so that we have gas and electricity networks doing their own long-term plans, using consistent data, and all being on the same page and working with the local governments that are making those investments. So that's a sort of a brief overview of sort of quite a breadth of work that in the whole system work stream that we've been covering. And next year we're taking these products on to the next stage of development, and hopefully with a couple of them, like the whole system CBA model, into implementation, into an enduring ownership that will be used into the future. So that's everything from me. I think we've got a poll that's going to pop up on the screen following me finishing up. But I think there's another question that I'd like to pose to the audience as well, and that is, where and when do you see the most value coming from whole system coordination, particularly across gas and electricity, but in what instances and at what point in time do you see that value really coming to fruition? But I will finish up there and pass back.
Thanks very much, Mark. I'll just bring up the next poll, which is how important is whole system energy coordination? If participants can just answer that question over the next minute, that would be great. Great, thanks very much for your answers, people. I'd just like to now hand over to Louise van Rensburg, the Deputy Director of the Energy System Transition from Ofgem. She's going to take over as your host for the session. Louise, can you hear us?
Yes, hi everyone, and I do apologise. With complete and utter perfect timing, as the session started, my computer decided to crash, so it's taken me this long to get back in. So, thanks so much for kicking us off. And again, I do apologize, but what can you do with technology? But at this stage, I'd like to please invite Graham Campbell, who is head of DSO for SP Energy Networks, to kick off his presentation. Graham, over to you.
Okay, thanks Louise, and good afternoon everyone. I trust you're all well and enjoying the new format for the conference today. It's a pleasure to take part in the session. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes talking to you about two things. One, the use of data within the Open Networks project, and principally my role as chair of the Energy Networks Association Data Working Group, which was formed about a year ago in response to the work that Richard Dobson and others, who's Richard being part of this panel, undertook on the Energy Data Task Force. So firstly, as both Sotiris and Mark have explained, data is ultimately at the heart of everything we do in open networks, not least from a flexibility perspective in terms of surfacing the requirements for flexibility, or indeed what we would need to do from a whole system perspective. But data also forms a huge part of other work streams within open networks, including work stream 2, where we're looking very much at things like what was called initially the system-wide resource register. It recently changed to the embedded capacity register, which is a publicly available a set of information that provides you with data on the resources that are connected to distribution networks in order for you to help your planning process in whatever field of expertise you're in. It also looks at things like queue management and interactivity processes, which are clearly very contingent upon data itself. Again, within workstream 1B, looking at things like future energy scenarios and the coordination between future energy scenarios across the ESO and each of the distribution companies. It looks at investment planning and the role that investment planning has and the criticality of data within that, and data exchange and activities that allow data to be exchanged between parties, and how we can then use that data to meet the requirements of stakeholders. And as Sotiris said, ultimately open networks is stakeholder led. And that segues nicely into the work we do on the data working group, which effectively is also stakeholder led and in response to the 5 key recommendations of the Energy Data Task Force, which I'm sure the vast majority of you, if not all of you, are very much aware of. And if you aren't, I would certainly recommend you look it up in the search engine of your choice and have a read at it, because it's a very, very useful and insightful document. So the data working group, which covers not just electricity companies, but also gas, including both the distribution and transmission, was formed over a year ago. And I was fortunate enough to be nominated as the chair of that working group, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the work we've done over the course of the last year. And some of you may be familiar with the work through some stakeholder sessions that we've had informing stakeholders of the work we're doing and the activities we're looking at. And ultimately, the key intention of the data working group is to bring together all network companies across distribution and transmission from a whole system perspective and look at how we can share data, look at how we can identify best practice, we can implement best practice, we can work to common frameworks, we can work to common platforms, and ultimately surface the data that's available and of course useful and ultimately leading to customer and consumer benefit. So at the moment, the work itself is focused on 3 key areas. And I should also add that it's working in tandem with BEIS and Ofgem and Innovate UK and other very interested parties, because there's obviously an awful lot of work going on around the data landscape at the minute. But within the data working group itself, there are 3 principal activities. Firstly is the NISM, as it's called, or the network mapping systems, which we are looking to develop in 2021, which will be a common data sharing activity to provide geographical representation of data that's available between network companies. And for those of you who are aware of it, you'll know that there's a digital system map equivalent in Australia that we are using, if you like, as the vanguard for what it is we're trying to achieve within the data working group. We're also looking at putting in place common data triage processes, such that, in a similar vein to what we're doing around flexibility, when stakeholders seek data from network companies, they get responses to that in a very common and consistent way, such that the data they receive is done so in the appropriate manner. And finally, we're also looking at a coordination group. So as I've already mentioned, there's huge amounts of work going on in the data landscape. That coordination subgroup is really looking at bringing all those activities together, surfacing the data that's appropriate, and crucially making sure that any data that is surfaced is underpinned by a use case and associated benefits that ultimately deliver the benefit to the end consumer. So there's a huge amount going on across data, because ultimately it is the foundation for what we do. I could spend probably an hour talking to you about it. That was a very whistle-stop tour of the activities that are going on, but hopefully that will give everyone a flavour for the focus that as network companies we're putting on data and how crucial it is to the success of open networks and the data working group, Louise. So at that, I think there's further poll questions to come, but I'll hand back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Graham. Yes, there is one more poll in this section. And if I could all ask you to respond to the poll question, is it clear how open networks contributes to net zero? And hopefully you can all see that poll. And we'll give you a couple of minutes to click on your answers. Just perhaps if anyone is still thinking about it, maybe just to conclude this part of the session, I'd like to thank very much Satoris, Mark and Graham for your introductory remarks and giving anyone who's not familiar with the Open Networks project a better feel for some of the key topics. And certainly from Ofgem's point of view, those really are three fundamental topics that we are very keen that the companies focus on. So, I mean, firstly, the importance of coordination is massive, and it is something that we are constantly talking to companies about, and really clear that we want to see greater coordination. I honestly don't see how the system of the future will work without it. Secondly, the need to think whole systems is clearly vital as well. You can't just think in a box anymore. You need to think outside the box and engage with as wide a group of people as possible to make sure that we do get the best solutions embedded. And then finally, I mean, data is just fundamental to our new system and for any future system changes. And the need to have greater transparency is, again, something that we are very much putting our money where our mouth is, and are sort of putting in new license requirements as we speak. And as Graham mentioned, there's a lot of work in this space across data, on data across government, Ofgem, and in industry. So I think that is the end of that particular session. We'll be able to show you the results of the polls very shortly. But I'd like now to move to our panel discussion. So this is very much an opportunity for you all to have to speak to our panelists, and we'll have our three speakers that we've just had on the panel. And I'd also like to introduce to the panel two additional speakers. One is Richard Dobson, who I'm sure many of you will be familiar with from the Energy Systems Catapult. And the second speaker that it is great to have on board today is Carmen Gemello from GOD. So perhaps to start off our panel session, if I can perhaps ask Richard to kick us off. And Richard, I wonder if you could give us your reaction on what you've just heard from the three speakers, and let us know what you feel we need for our future electricity grid. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks very much. I thought they were three really interesting talks. Having had a little bit of involvement in some of the groups within the Open Networks, it's really interesting just to hear more about what's going on in each of the work streams. I think from the energy systems catapult perspective, we're very focused on helping innovators and helping lots of small innovators particularly. So I know that standardizing flexibility products and standardizing the way that they're able to actually interact with the networks is a really big enabler for innovation and bringing forwards those new and interesting business models that will help us get towards net zero. Whole system thinking and whole systems integration is so important, particularly as we go towards net zero. We can't do this in isolation. We have to be thinking across energy vectors. Ideally, you know, going into other traditionally siloed sectors, so bringing in input from transport and local authorities, and also heat networks. So there's some really important work going on in that work stream as well. And I think we're particularly interested in the interaction between the gas and electricity networks. It's a really interesting point to actually understand how do we make the best of the assets we've already got. And then finally, with the data working group, I think there's some excellent work going on there. I'm particularly excited to hear about the digital system map going forwards and being taken forwards, I think, by the tender that's just complete. So that's very exciting to see that, because I think it's one of the fundamental enablers of innovation, is to be able to know and really get a sense of what the system is that we're working with and be able to understand how we can contribute to it meaningfully. In terms of what I think we need from a future electricity system and the networks that support that, I think for me, the big transition that we're looking at here is about how do we help the networks move forwards and become modern digitalized systems that are able to deal with the high levels of dynamic generation and demand that we're going to start seeing more and more over the years. And how do we make sure that they're able to make the best use of all the assets that are available? And that's really about making sure that we're integrating digital systems and solutions, bringing telecoms to be an important part of the energy system, not just an add-on afterwards, but also thinking about how do we make the best use of the skills and talent we have in the sector, really upskill and make sure we have a sector that's able to kind of adapt and evolve as we go forwards into the future and really keep up with the rest of the economy as we move towards net zero, be a really productive part of it. So I think digitalization to underpin flexibility is kind of the really important point for me here.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, you know, I think we do quite often speak about the importance of digitalization and data, but I thought you brought up a very good point in terms of your skills and talent as well. You know, another vital aspect, and certainly I think when you start talking about digitalization and then skills and talent, there's probably quite a fair bit of upskilling we need to do in this area. Thank you. Thanks. So let's move on to Carmen. So Carmen, it's really great to have you on board and sort of bring a bit of the sort of European angle as well. And I wonder if you can start us off and talk to us about you know, what you think the role is in terms of DSOs and how they can enable flexible solutions in the network. And also perhaps if you could talk to us a little bit about the new DSO entity and perhaps how that can add value and possibly help with the important role of facilitating network integration. Carmen, over to you.
First of all, for those who doesn't know GEOD, I'm the Secretary General of GEOD, the European Association representing local electricity and gas distribution system operators, DSOs, as we call them, DNOs in Europe. That's it. So, well, first of all, I want to congratulate you for this Open Network project. I think this is a very valuable project which we are looking with interest in Europe, in many countries, but for sure within our association we are looking and learning from what you're doing, because UK is well advanced, and DNOs there are really practicing in reality with flexibility, operational flexibility, which is not the case, sadly, in many or most, I would say, of member states in the continent. So, flexibility is clearly a cornerstone for the future energy system, in which distribution networks will play a bigger role. And there is really a need to increase this flexibility. And at the same time, as many colleagues have mentioned just before me, there is also a need to enhance cooperation between distribution and transmission, but also among different energy carriers and also sectors. So probably we can say that flexibility and cooperation are like two sides of the same coin. At the same time, a more flexible system will allow for better sector integration, which is key, and in which we think that energy networks are really the enablers of this system integration. And with more system integration, we will really succeed to reach the ambitious targets on decarbonization and climate in both at European level, but also in the long term. I think that we believe with NGO that only a holistic approach that intelligently links the sectors together, thus increased flexibility and efficiency, can deliver the desired outcomes. Distribution grids, for electricity, gas, heating, and cooling can play a very important role in this transformation, enabling resources to be efficiently transferred between different sectors and market actors. And there are already practices, and many of your projects you are discussing today deal with that, on how the gas grid can actively support the electricity grid in keeping the network stable. For instance, when the storage of fluctuating or renewable energies is facilitated through power to gas solutions, or through the use of the gas grid as a storage facility. Also, power to heat solutions are capable of storing electricity, keeping the distributed system, and therefore increasing flexibility. For that, we need an enabling framework, but also wide enough to respect very good initiatives at the national, regional, or local level, because there is not one size fits all. So different areas might need different solutions, and this is important to keep it in mind and be respected. About the UDSO entity, which is going to happily start functioning by spring next year. Well, we think that, really, the Commission really acknowledged the important role of the distribution networks when creating through the electricity regulation this UDSO entity, which will play a major role and will give us a single voice to the distribution networks, and creating by that way a level playing field with NSOE, which represents that as the transmission system of operators in Europe. Therefore, we will work together with the TSOs at the same level. We will be able to draft network codes and guidelines on items which will impact the distribution networks, and one of them is with the future network code on flexibility, because there is an agreement among TSOs, DSOs, Commission regulators that there is a need for further regulation, both at the technical level, you were mentioning, on the products definition, harmonization of products, compensation mechanisms, etc., and also at the level of remuneration. Because probably you are quite lucky in UK in that sense that in most member states at the moment there are no incentives to DSOs to really procure flexibility services. The remuneration supports more CapEx than OpEx. If you can see the flexibility services as part of the OpEx, there is no support, no incentive to the DSO. However, we hope that with the implementation of the Clean Energy Package, which have been done already by the end of this year, but we hope soon in the coming months of the next year, we will see better schemes and regulators. They have already stated in a paper-based year that there is an equal treatment of CapEx and OpEx in order to unlock flexibility. I think in terms of time, I leave it here with
Thank you very much. Yeah, again, I think a number of very interesting points, and I think just highlighting the importance that, also at European level, the importance that's being put on coordination is clearly important. You can't just have one voice speaking. There needs to be a number of voices talking together. So thank you very much for that. And certainly, I would add, as regulators across Europe, we have been looking at what the best solutions are, and everyone does tend to come up sometimes with different solutions because they have different specific structures in their own countries. But I feel that in GB we've had some great development in some of our sort of flexibility work. I still think we have a lot to learn from Europe as well, who are looking at slightly different types of flexibility markets, which I think is really useful for us to explore as well. So I think now is a good time to pause to have a look at the polls that we've done. Will you be able to bring up the answers on the polls? The results. I'm not sure if everyone can see the polls.
It should just be on the right-hand side next to the screen for everyone. Unless you're on a mobile phone, it might be coming up in the middle if you're on a mobile device.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so can all of our panelists see those results? And I think for the first poll was about what are the top priorities that are most important for the open networks. So it's quite, but there seems to be a bit of a focus on the common evaluation methodology. I think that's what I'm seeing here. So Taurus, any reflections on that?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Having a common way of evaluating flexibility, I think, gives transparency into how the markets value that flexibility, which will increase confidence. Absolutely. I would like to highlight that the common evaluation methodology with a supporting tool is planned to go live by the 1st of April. So some of the companies have already started using it. Some of them are in the process of embedding it in their processes. And there's a couple of areas that we're going to be taking forward next year for further work. One is the option value, and the second one is around carbon value. So we did a sprint, and we have a methodology that can deliver essentially a cost-benefit analysis between an asset investment or an active network management type connection investment versus a flexibility contract. But there's more enhancements around option value and carbon value that will be coming next year. So yeah, so Luis, as you and the government have pointed to, this is a top priority for you. So I think you must be happy that the audience agree with your priorities as well. But absolutely something we are taking forward next year.
No, that is great. Yeah, certainly the stakeholders we've spoken to and ourselves are really keen on there being transparency in the decisions that are taken. So as you say, there is more development work, but one has to start somewhere, and it's good to see that this has started and is getting going, and definitely look forward to the development work that will happen next year as well. Thank you. Can we see the results of the second poll? Right. How important is whole energy systems coordination? I'm amazed that there are so many no answers, because I would have thought this would have been quite clear. But having said that, I think we've got essential coming out as the top, and very important coming out as the second option. I think that probably does sort of say it all. But I don't know, Mark, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot you could dig into with a bit more polling, I guess. I know yesterday we were playing around with what questions are we able to ask on the polls, and one that we couldn't fit through the poll was one I mentioned when I did my intro, was when do we think it will become important, and where, and what situation? And picking up on one of the things that Carmen mentioned was that there's different solutions in different places. So there will be some situations where whole system interactions may not be as important to get to a decarbonized energy system, but there'll be other situations where it's absolutely critical. And we're starting to see those already. So one of the products in the workstream last year was looking at forecasting the impacts of renewable electricity generation on the gas network. Because when the wind comes up, you'll see gas generation go down, and vice versa, and what impact does that have? And that hasn't previously been an issue, but we're starting to see that come through now. And if you think we're only 18 months or so into a net zero target, by the end of the decade, we're seeing if we stick to a net zero pathway, we're going to see 2 to 7 terawatt hours a year of hydrogen being created from electricity. So that's going to be, you're going to see increasing whole system impacts, and therefore need for whole system coordination, I think, in different pockets.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And Carmen, I don't know if you want to come in. I know at a European level, the whole the discussion around sort of sector integration is also quite prevalent. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, maybe another point on this whole energy system approach is about the importance of this coordinated infrastructure planning. I think this is also key. So it's not only at the level of operation, but also in the planning. And there is, for now, to include in the 10-year network development plan that it's an exercise that has been done separately by the TSO level, by the gas and the electricity ones. So it's already now a few years that they are cooperating together, and the next one is going to be jointly developed, including also the distribution networks there, both for electricity and gas. This, I think, is an important achievement and could lead to very good results.
Yes, absolutely. If you don't start with the planning, you've probably missed a trick. Yeah, I agree.
Not an easy exercise, but at least
not easy, but really important, though. No, absolutely. Can we go to the third poll, and let's have a look at what the results were on that. So the third poll is, how important is the visibility of network data? So very similar responses to the last poll, although quite interesting that there were a couple of people who didn't think it was that important, which is very interesting. But who would like to come in? Graham, do you want to start us off with a bit of a reaction to the poll responses?
Sure, Louise. So, not ultimately surprising that ultimately more than 50% or nearly 50% feel it's essential or very important, and that includes broadly 50% that didn't respond. So I'm not surprised by that at all. I guess the fundamental question for me, though, is what extent do we need to make network data visible? Because we've got to obviously balance, and Louise, you and I have spoken about this before, balance the cost of surfacing the data, which ultimately consumers have to pay for, versus the value that's created by that data, and not just for those who use it, but for wider consumers. And that's really important, because we need to ensure that the transition and the benefits the data create benefit all consumers. So, there is clearly value in the data that we can surface, and we're seeing great examples of that today, and we have done for some time, not least flexibility markets or whole system approaches. But if you think back 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, for those of you who were involved in the extent of generation that was connected to distribution systems at that point, providing data on what was at the time called heat maps was essential to giving developers, fit for a start around where to look to connect generation. And that was crucial at the time, and it saved an awful lot of work and heartache for not just developers but network companies themselves. So data is crucially very important, but I still think there is a key responsibility not on those seeking data but equally the network companies to ensure that the cost of surfacing that data delivers value for all consumers, not just for those that are requesting the data. So I'd be interested from the participants if anyone's got any views on that for perhaps discussion later on in the call. But that's something that we are very mindful of as a group and something that we continue to look at in detail.
A very good point, actually, and I think it's a fine balance trying to work out where the value is and who will value it and how best to develop those use cases to make sure you're actually getting people specifying what it is that's important and what the value is. Particularly as I feel like with data, sometimes just having the data out there, you might not know what the value is until it's out there and someone comes up with a great idea, which does make it complicated. But I think it'll be interesting if we get any questions through related to data. Does anyone else want to have a reaction to the data poll and any other thoughts on the data? I don't know, Richard.
Yeah, sure.
I know this is a hot topic of yours as well.
Yeah, you could say that. I think this is it's not surprising at all that essential and very important are up there in terms of the actual answers. I think that's been quite clear over the last kind of 18 months, 2 years of work we've done around this. We know people want to know what data exists. I think the wording of the question is quite interesting in that it says visibility of data. So does that mean people want to know what data exists? And I think the consensus is yes, we definitely want to know what data exists. Whether or not all of that data should be accessible to everyone and all in the public domain is a slightly different question. And I think that's really where the costs start to come in. And that's really where we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about how we do it, because we don't just want to dump tons of very sensitive data on the internet available for everyone to access. No one wants to undermine the security and the stability of the system. But like you say, there's this other side where we're saying we're in a time of unprecedented change. We're aiming for a net zero energy system, and we don't have all the solutions to every single problem that we're going to see. And there might be innovators from other sectors or innovators with bright ideas coming out of universities or research institutes that might be able to pick up the data that we're able to provide and come up with some great answers to the questions that as a sector we can't quite get our head around. So I think we definitely need a balance, and I think some of the stuff that's going on in the data working group is really important there, because we've got the open data triage working group where many of the networks are getting together to understand what should the process look like for an interested individual who wants to get access to the data, and how do we do that in an efficient way so we don't repeat the exercise across every single network operator to provide the same data and have to go through and take the same cost that we as consumers all end up paying for. So yeah, I think there's some challenging questions there, but there's also a ton of opportunity. So I would be really interested to find out why one person thought it wasn't important at all, but that's probably just me being a little bit nosy.
Maybe we could get a question coming through on in the comments on that. But no, I mean, I completely support what you just said there. I think I think fundamentally with the whole data discussion, what it needs is a complete sea change in how people think about it, and I think it really is one of those topics where you've got to just park how you used to think about it, and actually I think we would encourage the companies to be very aspirational in where they could take this and how useful this could be. And then marry that aspiration with the sort of underpinning of that sort of cost benefit case to make sure that, you know, it is value for consumers and they're focusing in on the right things. But yeah, very much that sort of sea change and thinking about it and being aspirational and thinking about the future, because anything we do now, you know, probably have other things to prioritize in the not too distant future as well. So I think it could be a real sea change in how we do things in the energy system. Absolutely.
Louise, just a couple of points from me on the data, which are probably obvious points, but I thought I'll throw them in the mix. The first one is about, as you say, looking out on the future and looking at the 11 million EVs or 12 million or whatever the figure is under the 10-point plan that are coming, but in the next 10 years. You know, we'll need the data at the low voltage network to be able, A, to justify the investments, but B, to enable flexibility. I don't think there's a magic value proposition. I mean, there's obvious value propositions around, you know, being able to understand what's happening on the network and also enabling flexibility. And you will need the data in those parts of the network that you didn't have them before. Yes, but of course, low voltage networks are huge. And I think the point that you are making and Graham was making is around the cost benefit analysis. But I just wanted to make sure that we are clear that there is an obvious value proposition around acquiring and making that data available. That's the first point. The second point is from a network perspective, there's a lot of talk of us providing data, but we also need data. So, you know, it's not just one-way street, us giving all our data for someone magically to construct something. You know, a lot of the work, the investment, and the reliability for keeping the lights on, you know, lies with us. So, you know, we will need to have visibility of what's happening behind the meter, especially as a lot of the action is moving at residential level. So, when we talk about data, I think we need to remember it's a two-way street.
That's a really useful point to bring in. Definitely, I quite often am in conversations where I do think, you know, as you know, I mean, I think DNOs do need to make more data available, but equally, I do think sometimes people think they have more data than what they actually do have. And sometimes it's not in their gift to make something available because they don't have the levers to sort of require some of the information. And you know, certainly anyone who follows our consultations will see we put out a call for evidence on how to get more visibility from distributed generators, because that is, as you say, a very important element that we are going to need more information about. And currently, I don't think DNOs, you know, have all the information that they probably need.
And Louise,
yes,
maybe to bring from at the European level to remind you that we are working in secondary legislation on interoperability requirements for data access and exchange of data. This is there is an editing group made by TSOs and DSOs experts, and this group is chaired by the European Commission. They have been working already for a year almost, and the work is quite advanced in that sense. And this is going to be also very important when it comes to data. And I fully agree with colleagues. I think that, I mean, the DNOs, they need controllability and observability of the grid. They need to have information on the status of the grid in real time, and also they need information to ensure the right activation of flexibility by the grid users. This is really crucial too. So I fully agree with colleagues that this different two directions. It's not only from us to deliver data, but we also need data.
Definitely, and it's both from the very smallest end, but also the data sharing between the system operator and the DSOs is also really important. I mean, perhaps Mark, if you want to come in on this, just to close off the discussion on this particular question, a comment from the ESO side would be quite useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So I fully agree with everything that's been said so far, and I think on the specific part of data sharing from the ESO's perspective, I'm trying to think of a part of the organization that doesn't have some sort of initiative looking at how do we share data with people that we haven't shared it with before, and how do we get a visibility of parts of the system that we haven't had visibility of before to inform our decisions day to day and make those better. So we're obviously doing a lot of work through the Open Networks projects, but we've also got sort of innovation projects and just sort of day-to-day processes that we're constantly changing to look at how we can share data better, faster, more frequently, and look at the quality of that data as well, and make sure that everyone's using the same data in the same ways and they interpret the same things from it. Because more and more we're making the same kinds of decisions across all the different network companies, and those decisions are impacting different organizations. So we need to be thinking about the data sets in the same way.
That's a really important point. I know firsthand a number of the discussions in the open networks has just been about, do we all mean the same thing when we say this? And when we ask for information, what are you actually sending us? I find it fascinating because you just don't think that there'll be a difference, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can we go to our last poll? Our last poll question. I'm just conscious of time, and we probably need to give time for the audience to ask questions. So just a really quick discussion on the last poll question, which was: is it clear how open networks contributes to net zero? So we've got a small majority saying yes, but a lot of people with no answer. Which probably is not a great answer. So perhaps a few comments from the panel on that, and I'll throw it wide open. Who would like to come in first on that?
I have one thought I'm happy to share and get the ball rolling, if that's helpful. My initial so I looked at those numbers and I thought, oh, that's a bit surprising. But then on reflection, actually not so surprising, because if you think about it, we, as a nation, we only set the net zero target 18 months ago. And I think it's just a maturity of our collective understanding of what it takes to get to net zero. Because sort of in 18 months, you can see the broader debate and discussion. People are getting on board with, like, what do you need to do to decarbonize heat or transport or electricity, but the next level down are sort of, okay, so if you decarbonize all of those things, what is required to make that actually work? And that's where you get into the stuff that Open Networks is grappling with. And so I think if you think, I think people are very much getting on board with where does the energy come from and what's using it, but what do you need to do to the systems that deliver that energy is probably the next part of the journey. And it looks like we've got sort of more than half the respondees are fully on board with that and understand that, flexibility, whole system thinking and data are critical to that. But that doesn't mean that that message has got across as widely as it needs to.
How about our other panelists? Sartorius, Graham, do you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good feedback. So I take it as good feedback. I agree with what Mark was talking about. I think it's a bit of maturity. I think there's more we can do to align the kind of open networks message and work with net zero. I mean, if we if we take a step back, open networks was born of the need to coordinate better transmission distribution and essentially to accelerate flexibility as an alternative to network investment. And at the end of the day, that's the biggest value pot really in terms of when you look at a distribution network. We have since expanded to whole system, and we're looking at the whole piece. So I think there's more we can do to align the message. But I think at the core, really, what we are about the net zero transition. We are about delivering, flexibility, the data enablers, the whole system coordination. So, no, it's absolutely aligned, but we can do better to get the message across.
And I guess there's a great opportunity in that you'll shortly be consulting on your program of work for the next year. So I think that's a really useful comment to take back and see if that can be articulated a bit more clearly. I agree with you. I think all the elements are very much contributing. But it could be probably articulated better. So good point. Well, I'm seeing at the time, and I'm completely failing in that we should have started our questions now. So let's go to some of the questions. So the first question, actually, given we've just been talking about the program for the open networks, the first question I see here that's quite relevant is this, and that is, bearing in mind the ESO's goal of operating the grid carbon-free by 2025, what are the next priority products for the Open Networks project? So there's quite a big question, and I know that the teams are currently focusing on next year's. So perhaps a few comments on next year's work, but perhaps some longer term comments as well. Satoris, do you want to kick that off?
Yeah. So, Louise, on my talk, I mentioned that we are now kind of moving the focus on when we look at products and contracts to align them with ESO and the kind of the national markets. And for me, when you look at and of course, Mark can talk a lot more about the 2025 target and the specifics, but at the end of the day, from an ESO perspective, key to delivering the 2025 operations, the ability to access all resources. So a lot of the work next year and the year after is going to be how we can put a coordinated framework that allows the flexibility providers, the aggregators, the distributed energy resources to stack values so they participate and they come into play. But between transmission and distribution, we have a framework and a protocol that it doesn't break the networks, basically, either side. So that bit about the coordinated framework and the revenue stacking, I think is going to be the key priority for next year. I mean, this year we saw here in the UK with the COVID impacts, we saw things like the optional downstream flexibility product that was used over the summer by the system operator. That product was essentially a turned down product of a lot of distributed connected generators that they were not previously participating in national markets. So linking those generators into the national markets in an ability that can also participate and provide benefit, also distribution in a coordinated way, I think it's gonna be one of the key priorities really over the next couple of years.
No, absolutely. That coordination definitely will be fundamental. Mark, did you want to come in quickly on that?
Yeah, sure thing. So what would I add to that? I think if part of the question is thinking about what are the next priority products for Open Networks projects, I think it's not just about Open Networks, and that there's lots of other work as well, working between the ESO and the distribution companies on reaching that carbon-free 2025 goal. So you can see things like our regional development plans, or the projects like between ESO and UKPN, the Power Potential project, where we're looking at how do you access reactive power support, not just from the transmission network, but also from distribution networks. So I think it's sort of, we should, yes, absolutely look at open networks and what's next, but also the concept of whole system, but sort of stepping back and seeing the bigger picture. There's so much going on across the industry, and making sure that it all fits together is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll know from I think just about every meetings we're stressing the importance of the ESO being coordinated with the DNO markets and vice versa. So definitely take that. I'm going to shift the topic a little bit and take us back to data. And this question is quite related to a point that we had in our discussions. And someone's asked the question, which data would be required? Is there a map as to which data should be used and by who? Very interesting question. Graham, do you want to have a stab at starting off that discussion?
No problem, Louise. Thanks for the easy question. Look, I guess that is the question in many respects, because ultimately, you know, if I go back 18 months and some of the initial discussions that we were having with Richard and others around the Energy Data Task Force, it was very much about surfacing data, making it open and accessible, and we'll see what innovation that creates. But I'll go back to the point I made earlier on. It's important that we do so in the best interest of all consumers who are ultimately paying for this. So we could provide screeds and screeds of data, but we need to invest in the systems or the technology to bring that data, you know, to the extent that it would become available. But someone has to pay for that. And ultimately, as it stands today, it's those paying bills that pay for a proportion of the work that we need to do to surface that data. And I think, as most people know, the data that we have, certainly real time, that exists below typically 11,000 volts is very few and far between. And yes, we can model using data that's statically gathered, maybe once, twice, 3 times a year. We can model what we think is the impact on the system, and that's what's allowing us to go out for flexibility at the low voltage network. Without the real-time data, we risk increasing costs. So Louise, again, I think we've had this discussion before. If I take SP Energy Networks as an example, we're seeking flexibility, and we're allowed 1,000 locations on our LV network. We know where we expect to see the capability of that network being breached. Therefore, we know what flexibility needs to be required, but we're looking for it between a time frame that we might not necessarily require for the full time frame, without having the real-time data that makes it available to us and the market, such that we can pay for the right flexibility at the right time, because otherwise we're just increasing costs to the consumer. So I would ask stakeholders to give us views on what use cases they would seek data for and the value that that creates, and we've been doing that through the data working group. Equally, all our individual companies are doing that through their own stakeholder engagement. But we need to come back to the principle that says, in order to make this data available, there's ultimately investment required, and that investment has to be paid for. So that we're trying to find the balance between bringing the data to those who require it, such that we can create value, but at the same time doing so in what ultimately is a cost benefit to consumers. So it's a very difficult question to answer. We think we know from the engagement we've done, but there's undoubtedly more solutions and more opportunities out there. So I would encourage all stakeholders to come forward with their ideas.
I would definitely echo that. I think being clear on what those use cases are, so that they can be sort of valued and motivated, is really important. So we'll definitely echo that. On a related note, someone's asked the question that the value of data is directly related to the quality and availability of the data. Also, organizational silos are mirrored in data quality and availability. Can the panel share with us their thoughts on the blockers to progress quality or cleansing of data? Now, I think the quality of and cleansing of data was mentioned earlier. I think, Mark, it might have been by you. who would like to come in and talk about the quality and cleansing of data?
Louise, I'll kick off with a few thoughts on data quality and the cleansing of data. So absolutely, there's an age-old saying that what you put in will ultimately drive what you get out. So if the quality of data that we have available isn't to the extent that we would like it to be, then whatever is made available and therefore whatever is used is unlikely to derive the right answers. What I would say, however, is that it touches on Satiris's point earlier about the data that's also available to network companies. So, we're all aware of the challenges we've had around identifying the location of solar PV on domestic rooftops, and the challenges that presents us with modelling accurately the impact that we'll see on low voltage networks. To this day, that data has only been made available at a high level, and we have to make some assumptions around what that looks like, despite the fact that at the time, the installer and the consumer was obliged to tell the network company, as is contained within the Common Connection Agreement that all domestic consumers sign up to, that data should be made available to network companies, and it hasn't been. And there are other examples of that. Mark knows well through the work we're doing on the Loss of Mains programme, with each of the network operators, the challenges we've got in surfacing and the quality of data associated with embedded generation. And that's not necessarily as a result of people not focusing on data quality, it's just about what data was made available at the time and the solutions in which it was captured. So all network companies are going through an inordinate amount of detail and time to clean up the data that they're seeking to make available through the things I talked about in the data working group. In the digital system map that I've referred to, we'll start to surface an awful lot more of that data in a common and consistent way with a quality to match. But ultimately, the quality is so important, but equally it requires investment. So this all comes back to network companies pulling together an ambitious programme of work on a common and consistent basis to the extent it's possible, but ultimately driving the right needs case and use cases for consumers that drives value. And that will be surfaced through the business plans, I'm sure, that are going on recently in transmission and gas and to come on distribution. So data quality is a key component. It's not lost in any of us. It's something we talk about frequently, but it is vitally important that it works both ways. The data we get has to be the same quality as the data we issue.
Yeah.
If I can, if I can jump in as well, if that's
Yes.
all right. Yeah. So I think actually there's almost a thread that joins together quite a few of the data-centric questions we've had, because I think there's a bit of asymmetry in terms of understanding what data exists, and I think that's a lot of what we've talked about, which is everyone says, oh, I want really granular low voltage data. Well, it doesn't exist yet. There's never been a use case that's justified us collecting it, so we don't have it. But if we're able to give a bit more visibility of what are the data sets you could pick from, you could potentially choose, that helps the potential innovators to think about their use cases. And we are starting to collect some use cases via the Modernising Energy Data conference space that Ofgem are hosting, to really try and understand what do people want to use the data for, and what does that mean in terms of linking and quality. And then when you actually get to the fundamental data quality, we've had challenges in the past, and I don't think we can really judge the sector at all for having data that's not in the best condition, because if there wasn't a use case, if there wasn't a business need, why would we have made it a perfect, most granular data set possible? We made it as good as it needed to be at the time, but now we're seeing those use cases coming forwards. And I think there's a difference between proactively making data perfect before we release it and making data good enough to release it. And I think we want to make sure that we're not releasing data that will result in counterproductive decisions being made. Like we're talking about the connection heat maps earlier, they were good enough for the use case to give people an indication of where they could connect. It didn't need to be perfect at the time. So I think there's a little bit chicken and egg. We need to give a bit of a flavour of what data we have, release some of that data so people can start experimenting, And then if it needs to be better quality, we can go around the loop and improve it. And actually data users might be able to improve the quality of the data. Sotirios talked about EVs. EVs will have an EV manufacturer will have potentially a gold mine of data across all of their vehicles that are connecting to the network in many different locations at many different times. And actually that data could be incredibly useful for networks. So it's a two-way street. If they're using the data, and we put the right license conditions on it, we can get that data back in a better condition than we gave it out in. So we can actually start to make it more holistic and more kind of a virtuous circle of we share the data, we get better quality back, therefore we're sharing better quality with the next user.
And we're once again back to the whole systems thinking as well. You know, if we can tap into other sectors, we could improve our own data. Absolutely. I'll just pick up another question that's come through very related to this. It is interesting to therefore understand how you're integrating smart meter data into your single data model to realize the value in network performance visualization. Now, I think all the network companies sitting on the panel all have been granted access to the smart meter data. So I think it would be worth talking a little bit about how that data